Clever Capture by Guy Clifford. Turning over the pages of one of my old diaries, I came across notes here and there about many curious riddles. Some worked out and ticked off as solved, others still awaiting the fullness of time when all shall be known. Amongst the former, perhaps one of the most curious of them all, the manner of its solution, is that which I have chosen as the title of this remarkable story. My friend and partner, Robert Graceman, has been almost invisible for several days, shut up in his den engaging in some recondite chemical experiment, appearing only at occasional intervals to restore exhausted nature with a hasty meal. His usually rebukant and jovial face bore evident signs of his continuous and laborious researches. His eyes were heavy and leaden-looking with want of sleep, and his whole demeanor showed most painfully the enormous strain of overwork that he was imposing on his system. That evening at dinner, I took him to task severely on the foolishness of continuing his work without proper relaxation. "All right, Holton, old fellow," he said. "A few more hours and then I will promise to take a holiday. Your anxiety, however, is quite unnecessary, for I'm as right as trivet, except that I feel a bit fagged. Tomorrow, however, I will lie in bed all day and catch up on my back sleep." So, with a nod and a smile, he left me to return to his crucibles and evil-smelling chemical mixtures. Next morning his place and the breakfast table was empty, and looking into his den I was glad to see his apparatus put aside, as though done for the present. Evidently the experiments he was engaged on were completed, for the present at any rate, so cautioning our old housekeeper not to disturb him, I descended to the offices to get through my morning's work. On going upstairs to lunch, I found the Graceman perched on the back of a chair, skimming the Daily Post. "Hello, Busy Bee," he exclaimed, throwing down the paper. "I've taken your advice, you see, and kept my promise. Now I'm going to dose you with your own physic. We will take a holiday together, turn up the business in chemistry, and have a good time." "I can't leave my office at present," I commenced when he broke in. "Well, then you'll have to take the office with you, then. For go you do, my boy, so there's no use in wasting time in discussing the point. The question is, where shall we go, and what shall we do?" "I may as well give in," I replied, with more appearance of reluctance than I really felt, for his joyous mood was very infectious, and a few days off would do us both some good. "I thought you wouldn't resist the temptation. Shall it be Brighton? Nah, too crowded. A few days up the river in Sonning? Say, wouldn't be half bad if the weather holds, and it looks like keeping up." So it was decided on the following morning we should pack our bags and depart for Sonning-on-Thames, one of the sweetest little spots of our lovely river. We were like the couple of schoolboys that evening, for it was seldom of late years that we had made holiday together, and it was a matter of some difficulty to unearth our boat's flannels, and so long as they remained unused. Graceman, who was a fisherman of more than ordinary zeal, spent hours in furbishing up his rods and tackle. However, at last all was ready, and everything packed up. We determined to start early, and before 9 o'clock we were on our way to Paddington. Sonning is an out-of-the-way little village, having no station of its own, so it is usually reached by driving from Twyford. As our train drew into the Maidenhead station, just this side of Twyford, Graceman, who was gazing out the window, suddenly called out, "Why, there's Lyman! I wonder what he's doing down here." And jumping up, he thrust his head out the window and waved his hand. Lyman, or Inspector Lyman, of Scotland Yard, to give him a proper title, was somewhat a favourite of Graceman's. In a few seconds he was at our door and shaking hands. "You're playing truant, Lyman," said Graceman. "Mr. Holton and I are here on a jaunt for a few days. What's the matter with you, man? You look hyped." I am hyped, sir, and pretty badly, too, returned the inspector. You no doubt saw the papers yesterday that there had been a burglary at Lord Lipton's house down here the night before, and her lady's Bishop's jewels stolen except those that she had on. The usual thing, you know, dinner time, entrance gained by a ladder into the lordship's bedroom. No trace about, no one there, no clue, no nothing. Wound up the inspector laconically. It's an aggravating thing, he went on, is that the one of 5 or 6 burglaries that have occurred during the last 6 weeks or so that we can find no clue. First they were down in Surrey at Woking, then Sevenoaks, Bickley, Harpenden, and Esher, all visited, and now they're here. We feel it's sure the same hand at all these places, for the work is so clean and not a slightest trace left behind on any of us to help us. Poor fellow, said Graceman. It's too bad of them to play you up such games. We're off now. Come and see us next week at the office, and if you don't catch them, we'll put our heads together. Goodbye. And so saying, Graceman resumed his seat on the train as it moved on. Our holiday was nothing to do with the adventure, so I will pass over the pleasant days we passed at the bosom of old Father Times, and come to our last night at Sonning. It was Sunday, and we intended on returning to London by an early train on Monday morning. We were sitting on the lawn of the White Hart Hotel, smoking a final pipe before turning into bed, when Graceman remarked, I haven't seen any account of the capture of Maidenhead burglars in the papers this week. Have you? I had forgotten there were such things as burglars, I replied. I scarcely look at the post which you so thoughtfully ordered. Ah, what a humbug you are, Halton, he languidly answered. When I proposed this little trip, you couldn't leave the office. But since you've been down here, I don't believe you thought once of all your multitudinous business obligations. My professional opinion is that at the heart, you're a loafer. A perfect loafer. Come on, let's start in. When we arrived at Paddington next morning, Graceman rather surprised me by saying he wanted to send a wire to Inspector Lehman. So making our way around the telegraph office, he dispatched the following message to that gentleman. Come and see me tonight at Fig Buildings, if you have not found your Maidenhead friends. Graceman. As we bowled along in a hansom, I endeavored delicately to pump him on the subject of burglaries in general, and Lehman's in particular, but he failed to respond to my insinuating inquiries, and recognizing my want of success, I at last assented. Business matters have an awkward way of accumulating during one's holidays, and I was kept busily employed for the rest of the day. I was reminded during the afternoon of Inspector Lehman's, however, by receiving a telegram saying he would call after dinner. I sent the message upstairs to Graceman, but the clerk said he was not at home. Graceman had returned, however, when I went to the dining room for dinner. You've had Lehman's wire? I said interrogatively. Yes, and I see he is still down at Maidenhead. He didn't say so in his message, I remarked. No, of course not. The telegram was dispatched from Maidenhead, if you'd noticed. Therefore, I think it's a fair inference that the man is also there, but we shall presently know what success he has had. Meantime, have you an engagement for Wednesday evening, as I have a little adventure to propose which I think you would like to share? I had nothing special on hand signified my witness to participate, and from past experience I refrained from trying to elicit what adventure was until he prepared to enlighten me. When dinner was over, we adjourned to the smoking room, where very shortly afterwards Inspector Lehman was announced. How is Maidenhead looking, Lehman? Said Graceman, with a twinkle in his eye as he shook the inspector's hand. You're getting quite sunburnt. I was about to make the same remark to you, returned Lehman. Both you and Mr. Holton are looking rather fit. As to Maidenhead, it's a jolly enough place if you're down there boating and nothing to worry you. But from a professional point of view, I'm just about tired of it. Then you've made little progress? No, we're just where we were when I saw you at the station. In fact, we're worse off. as there's been a week's loss of time with absolutely nothing to show for it. We overhauled several suspicious customers and during the first day or two after the burglary, but they were not our men. Personally, I don't hope to trace them, as I feel convinced they are well out of the neighborhood. Their mode of work shows me that they are too clever to be caught unless we are able to drop them red-handed. I cannot even form a definite theory as to who the thieves may be or how they work. You've helped me unravel some tough cases, Mr. Graceman, but then you've always had some clue or trace to work on, but now I'm beaten.
Never say die, said Graceman, as the inspector finished speaking. You forget the Delford mystery and the McHill case, to say nothing of one or two others where we had as little to guide us, and yet you pulled them off all right.
You pulled them off, you should have said, returned Layman, for if you had not put me on the right scent, they would have remained mysteries to the present day. But I fear not even you can pull these chestnuts out of the fire for us.
Now you want to nettle me, Layman. You know my weak side and take advantage of it, replied Graceman with a smile. However, I will humor you and accept your challenge, but mind you our usual understanding. My name, I say our names, for Mr. Halton will help me, are not to appear under any circumstances whatsoever.
Of course, I shall be charmed to go burglar catching, but I don't quite see, I began, when Graceman stopped me with,
Wait a bit, Walton. Layman, I want your assurance.
If you wish, of course, I promise, sir, but let me tell you frankly, I would much sooner be allowed me to inform my chief, for I don't much care for false credit, and praise so gained rather rankles me, said Layman, stroking his clenched fist on the table.
I must say as I say, returned Graceman. We cannot be known for the matter. You and I have worked together many times, and you have previously tried to overcome my desire for remaining incognito without success. You must accept the stipulation. And now to business. From information received, as the newspaper reporters have hit, I understand the burglary is to be attempted in Sunbury next Wednesday evening. My information, unfortunately, does not give me the address of the victims, nor does it state the numerical strength of the burglars, but I put the number at about 3. A very important fact, however, is that the Confederates meet at Sunbury Railway Station at 6:30 on Wednesday evening, and they are finished speaking on Wednesday evening, and as are the same gentlemen you are looking for at Maidenhead.
As Graceman finished speaking, he leaned back in his seat and surveyed the inspector, who sat bolt upright in his chair, his face vividly expressing the astonishment he felt as the explicit and detailed exposure of the enemy's plans. Well, this beats Mayflick and Cook. Why, if I did not know you so well, I would believe you were making a fool of me, exclaimed Layman. Here have I been in close communication with all our force, half over England, for more than a week on this job, while you return this morning from your holiday and in a few hours put your hands on the entire band. Yes, it's funny, awfully funny, he wound up as I burst into laughter at the comical expression the inspector wore. Excuse me, Layman, it's too bad to laugh at your perplexity, I said. However, I am as much in the dark as you are. Can you inform us, Mr. Graceman, the source of your remarkable intelligence? Began Layman.
I thought I told you, from information received.
Is that all?
All that I can tell you at the present, but I should like to ask you how you intend to act in the matter. Or perhaps you prefer to hear my ideas first and say what you think that means by them.
By all means, replied Layman.
Halton, Graceman commenced, please give me your attention, for you are as well acquainted over the ground which we are about to travel as I am.
And turning towards Inspector Layman, he continued.
Sunbury, as you are probably aware, is a small riverside village a couple of miles or so above Hampton Court. The station lies about a mile from the river, and the best part of Sunbury is situated close to the Thames. Along the road from the station, the village also has several large detached houses, and I may mention here that the road is exceedingly badly lighted at night time. I may say that near the station of the opposite side of the line are a number of houses, in fact, another village, But these are small cottages, and I don't think we need trouble to worry about them. You made the remark when we met at Maidenhead that there have been 5 or 6 burglaries, all very similar in character, during the past few weeks around London that have been occurring during the same time as the family were at dinner. Was this in such a case?
There was only one exception, if exception it may be termed, replied Layman. In the case of the thieves are presumed to have entered after dinner, as during dessert the lady of the house sent one of the servants up to her bedroom for her vinaigrette, and the girl noticed something unusual in the room, but they must have been just at hand, for within an hour the robbery was discovered by the lady's maid when she went to tidy up her mistress's room. For all practical purposes, we may therefore say each of these robberies was effected during dinner.
Then let us assume that the plans of our friends at Sunbury are laid on the same lines. What I propose is this, that tomorrow you go down to Sunbury with the same 2 or 3 good men, and thoroughly investigate the neighborhood. Find out which of the inhabitants is in the near vicinity who may be considered worth these fellows' attentions. Ascertain if there are any strangers recently arrived at any hotels, or if anyone giving a dance or dinner party on Wednesday evening. You will have but little difficulty in your inquiries, as it is only a one-horse place, and everyone knows everybody's business. You can leave your men down there if you like, but they must be careful to avoid being conspicuous. They should dress like boating men, flannel shirts and serge suits, go for a row a day to blind suspicion. By this means you will gain a good knowledge of the locality, and if you will call here tomorrow evening, we will make plans for Wednesday. If you get back in time, come straight on here and have dinner with us.
As Graceman concluded, he rose and stretched himself by slowly walking up and down the room, while Layman, after asking a few questions about Sunbury, and promising he would come see us again the next evening, lighted up a fresh cigar which I offered him, and took his departure. It's not asking too much, Graceman, I remarked when the inspector had gone. I should rather like to have 1 or 2 little points cleared up on this affair.
Say on, my friend.
Firstly, then, at what time on Wednesday do you require the pleasure of my company? And secondly, where are we, that is, you and I, going to? And thirdly, where are we going, and when do we get there?
Concisely put, and with commendable moderation, said Graceman, and I will reply as tersely. Firstly, 3 p.m. Secondly, Hampton Court. Thirdly, 4 Row. Having gratified your curiosity, I must bid you good night, for I still feel the effects of the balmy air of sunning, and I am confoundedly sleepy.
Whether this was an excuse to avoid further question or not, I cannot say, but I rather think it was, for my friend Robert's custom was rather to sit up till the small hours of the morning. Graceman, after breakfast next morning, informed our housekeeper that we should probably have a visitor for dinner that evening, and a little later on he joined me in the office, where, somewhat to my surprise, he remained the rest of the day. I think he rarely did, as I think I've mentioned before. Inspector Layman, however, did not arrive in time for dinner, and it was past 10 o'clock when he reappeared. His report of the day's proceedings in Sunbury may be summed up very shortly. As arranged, he made inquiries and suggested the previous night, and thoroughly surveyed the neighborhood. The most important facts he had gleaned were that there were 2 houses that would have parties on Wednesday evening, and that as far as could be learnt, there were no persons staying in the village whose movements were at all suspicious. These 2 houses were both on the road from Sunbury to Hampton, not more than 5 minutes apart.
The chief result attained, remarked Graceman, is that your knowledge of the ground will be immense advantage to us when we have to work at night. You, of course, particularly observed the situation of the houses which were giving the entertainments.
Layman signified his assent to the question with a nod.
Briefly, then, went on Graceman, my proposal is this. You take down 3 more good men tomorrow afternoon, and have them just outside the station at 6:15. It will be almost dark at that hour. How many men have you there now?
3.
Good. Then instruct 2 of them to proceed, and when it gets dark, to watch these houses, and the 3rd man must patrol between the 2. If nothing transpires, they're to return to Sainsbury Station at 11 o'clock. But if the burglaries arrive at the house, the man must get quietly away and summon the 2 confreres, and secure the thieves as best he can. Mr. Halton and I myself are going down to Hampton Court tomorrow afternoon. We shall row up to Sunbury, and we'll meet you at the Magpie Hotel. We shall be there before 6 o'clock, and we will immediately proceed to the railway station, where I hope to spot our friends when they meet. I think that provides everything. Graceman wound up interrogatively.
That's all right if we can recognize the scamps, replied Layman, or if they attack the houses we have under surveillance, but I don't see where we shall come in if we miss them at the station and they break into some other place.
That's certainly a weak part in our chain, returned Graceman, but I will show you how we can strengthen it when we meet the Magpie. For the method of our work, however, I think you will find 1 or more of these burglars are past masters at the trade, and I shall be more than surprised, Layman, if you don't find one of them to be an old acquaintance, in which case you will recognize 1 or more of them yourself. I need hardly suggest that all your men and yourself should be disguised, and as we do not wish the birds to take flight just when we are about to snare them.
Discussing various details of the morrow's campaign, it was nearly midnight when the inspector left us. Graceman and I went down early the following afternoon to Hampton Court, where we hired a light skiff from the boatyard we usually patronized, and informed the man that we should leave the boat at Sunbury that night, and he could send and fetch it back the next day. The distance by river to Sunbury is just about 3 miles. Graceman suggested that pulling easily, we could arrive at our destination about 5 o'clock, and have some tea before Layman joins us. I must not linger over the scenery of the river, which at that season of the year, for it was end of September, was full of ripe beauty, which always held me with a special charm, and the reach below Sunbury I consider one of the most beautiful in all the Thames. For myself, I thought it all too soon when we reached the landing stage of the Magpie Hotel, and the adventurous enterprise on which we were engaged was forcibly thrust upon me by Graceman's remark to hurry up, or I wouldn't get any tea. However, had we arranged matters so well that we finished our meal comfortably and lighted our pipes before the inspector arrived punctually at the stroke of 6. Dusk was fast deepening into the gloom of night as we started for the station, and as soon as we were out of the main street of the village, Layman reported that everything was in order as arranged.
Good, remarked Graceman. And now I will tell you how I mean to make the weak link of our chain right. But first I must look in here.
And as he spoke, he opened the gate of a tiny cottage, and walking up the short path, knocked on the door, which was opened almost instantly. "Ready, Tom?" we heard the gentleman say.
"That you, Mr. Graceman. Right you are, sir."
And the door shut, and 2 men came towards us. I remembered that this was the abode of Tom West, a professional fisherman who had many a time and oft been engaged a day's fishing by Graceman. In a few words, Graceman told him that, as we continued our walk, we were down there for, and then addressing Layman and myself, remarked that Tom knew every man, woman, and child at Sunbury, whether villagers or gentlefolk, that he had written to at 6 o'clock that evening when he called.
"You'll see presently at this distance will be the utmost servants," said Graceman, and then he continued his remarks, which the addition of our party had interrupted.
"You have no doubt noticed the exit from Sunbury Station is through a wooden gate at which the porter stands to collect tickets. I remember at that time my information gave the meeting place at Sunbury at 6:30. A coincidence, or shall I call it corollary, is the fact that the train arrives here at town 20 minutes past 6. What more probable, then, is the train brings 1 or perhaps more than the thieves. Now, Tom West, who can tell us who are natives and who are not, and if there are any strangers on the platform awaiting the train's arrival, we must watch them. If, however, there are no suspicious characters about, then we must look for them amongst the passengers of the train. You must place your men, layman, outside the gate where they will be talking together obscured in the gloom. They must watch you, and who will indicate to them with a nod of any fellow or persons Tom West does not know, which he will point out to me, and I will nod to you to the suspected party passes the gate. Your men, after shadowing the suspect, must report to you at the Magpie, where Mr. Halton and myself will adjourn as soon as you are engaged to the track. Here we are at the station, and the train signal too. Look sharp, Inspector. Arrange your men. We will go to the platform. As we passed on the platform, Graceman commenced to chat rather loudly with Tom West on the day's chance of sports and morrow amongst the barbel. There was apparently no one there besides ourselves, but still laughing and chatting, he kept the conversations from flagging for an instant, until the roar of his quickly approaching train drowned his retorts. Then he said sharply, "Tom, keep your eye on each person that approaches the exit. If you don't know them, give me a poke in my arm with your stick. Now look sharp and keep chattering and laughing all at the same time." There were very few passengers in the train, perhaps a score in all, and several had already passed through the gate when Tom West whispered, "That fellow in the brown hat gaping around near the gate's a stranger to me." As I glanced at the man out of the corner of my eye, I saw a look of recognition flash from him, and in a moment another man joined him. "There's another stranger talking with him," whispered West again. Both men now gazed at the quickly thinning group of passengers, when I noticed one touch the other on the arm, and both moved towards the gate. "Now, Halton," said Graceman rapidly in a low voice, "you walk off the gate as if you were going out, and when I call out Jim, count 5, then answer back yes, and return to us." Closely following Graceman's instructions, a few steps brought me amongst the last of the people pushing through the gate. The two men I had been watching just passed the exit when Graceman called out Jim. Waiting to count 5 before I replied, another voice outside the gate answered, "Hello?" At the same time, I shouted yes. Naturally surprised, I looked towards the spot where the third whence came. I saw 2 men who had been watching, together with a third man. I walked together towards the spot where Graceman stood. They were just through the gate in front of me, and I could have not touched them by putting out my hand. Fortunately, I didn't forget Graceman's instructions, and turning sharp around, I called, "Well, what is it?" As I did, I heard one of the 3 give a guffaw and say, "I thought it was you, Jim. The bloke wanted..." This little scene took far less time to act than it was to set down here, and half a minute would have been more than covered the time occupied. When I got close to Graceman, he burst out in a hearty laugh that might have been heard at the end of the road, and Tom West joined him. But what they saw to laugh at beat me. However, they seemed so tickled that I felt compelled to help them, so we laughed each together. "Capital! Couldn't have been better," said Graceman, when he had finished taking an exhibition of himself. "Oh, I'm glad of that, anyhow," I replied. "All right, old man, keep your hair on. What kind of chap was Jim?" "Tall, darkish beard, mustache, rough, dark gray overcoat, brownish soft cloth hat, and he had a largest black handbag." I answered somewhat proudly, for I have a woman's knack of taking stock of people at a glance. "My dear Halton, you're a credit to me. Let us away. Come on, Tom. Don't forget we're fishermen only now." So saying, we sauntered away from the station into the darkness of night. We had barely gone 30 or 40 yards before a figure advanced from the gloom of the hedge to the roadside. "It's all right, sir," said the figure, for it was layman. "My 3 men are shadowing them. We know one of the scamps, the one in the brown hat, so there's not the slightest doubt you've given up the straight-up tip this time. I must be off now after my men. Are you going to the Magpie?" "Yes." "Then I'll come home there directly we've located them," and the inspector was briskly off ahead of us. Nothing more was said as we returned to the hotel. Tom West and Graceman went deep into the merits of trolling and spinning for Jack, and the subtle niceties of snap tackle fishing for the same interesting fish. "Come in, Tom, and have a whiskey," said Graceman when we arrived at our destination. When we were seated in a comfortable corner of the smoking room, Graceman said, "Would you like to
Would you like to be in at the death, or shall we wait the final act here, Elton? I should rather like to see the capture, I replied. That is, if it's in the neighborhood. All right, we will decide when Layman returns. It was nearly an hour before the inspector appeared. He was beaming as sprightly as a 2-year-old. Declining my invitation to have a whiskey, he drew up a chair at our little table and detailed his movements since he left us. The presumed burglars had walked leisurely down the road we had just come without any sign of uneasiness. They continued through the village and came easy indifference until they were close to the house where the dinner party was in progress. There they loitered for a bit, as if to see if the coast was clear. Then they disappeared over the wall and shut off the side grounds from the road. One of the detectives followed them and returned in a few minutes to say they had ensconced in the summer house at the bottom of the garden. The other 2 detectives had then got over the wall and hidden themselves in the shrubs near the house, whilst the first went back to watch the summer house. "When do you start, Layman?" asked Graceman when the inspector had finished. "As soon as you like, sir. The dinner party is for 8 o'clock, and it's nearly that now, so we ought to be moving." "Come on, then. Let's be off, Holton, if you're coming." "Yes, I've come so far, I might as well see the finish," I remarked. "You must be careful, gentlemen," said Layman. "For one man I know is a dangerous customer. Is Mr. West going to join us, too?" "I should like to be uncommonly, if I shan't be in the way," eagerly remarked Tom. "All right," said Graceman. "You'll stick close to me. Now we're ready." And so saying, we moved off to our expedition. The night had closed in pitch dark, and a heavy mantle of black rain clouds obscured the heavens, and the wind was beginning to blow with some force. The road beyond the village was dark and lonesome. Some little distance before we arrived at our destination, the inspector bade us to halt, while he went in to see if all was quiet. Returning in about 10 minutes, he reported all serene, and under his guidance we went forward and clambered over the wall. He hid us away near the 2 detectives, and desired us to remain perfectly quiet unless he called us by name. The house was a wide 2-storied building with a veranda over the ground floor. Every room downstairs was blazed with light, but only the top rooms, only 2 rooms, showed a full light, whilst in the others there was only a dim twinkle, as though gas burners were turned down low. We were barely hidden away when we heard 8 o'clock strike for some neighboring church. Scarcely breathing, the minutes passed like hours, but it could be scarcely have been 8:15 when I saw 3 shadowy forms approaching from the opposite corner of the house. They halted close to where I was crouching with Tom West, and to one side and Graceman on the other. "Keep a sharp lookout, Bill," I heard one whisper, and then the same man said, "Give me a hoist." Clutching hold of one of the pillars that supported the veranda, and the other stooped for him to put his feet on his shoulder. Then, slowly rising, the climber grasped the edge of the veranda and drew himself up. A second man followed in the same manner, and when he was up, the other whispered down, "Now the bag." The fellow picked up the black bag, and groping about, presently said in a hoarse whisper, "All right." And I saw the bag slowly ascend. It had evidently been tied to a piece of cord, which was too dark to discern. From our hiding place, I could see the 2 men crawl from one of the darkened windows. Then, in a couple of minutes, I heard a faint click, and presently the window was slowly raised, and both men disappeared inside the house. I was quivering with excitement now, and breathlessly waiting for the next act of the drama. I had not long to wait. The man watching below stood back a little from the house, where he could command every window. Just behind him was a patch of shrubs, and as I watched him, a dark object crept noiselessly around the bushes, then straightened itself up. 2 arms shot out and clutched the watcher by the throat and threw him back into the grass. A dull thud was the only sound that reached me as the body fell. Then another figure joined the first, and a few others of the fallen men was drawn out of my sight by the bushes. Another figure then appeared and took up the position the captured man had occupied, whilst 3 other forms crept under the veranda, just where the burglars had climbed up. 10 minutes or so slowly dragged by.
Then the figure appeared at the open window and crawled quietly out, followed by his pal. When they got to the edge of the veranda, one whispered, "Here you are, Bill," and I suppose Bill stepped forward and secured the bag. Both of the men on the roof then lowered themselves over the edge and dropped right into the arms of those that were waiting hidden beneath the veranda. There was a bit of a scuffle, and the rest of us rushed up, but the capture was complete without our aid, and without a word having been spoken. When the handcuffs were on one of the twain said in a bitter tone, "Bill's preached, I suppose, Jim." "Yes, damn him," replied the other. "Oh, no, he hasn't," remarked Layman. "We've got him trussed like a fowl in the grass there. We've had our eyes on you since Maidenhead affair." "Yes, we've done it once too often," admitted the fellow. "But let us see what you've got in the bag here," said Layman as he spoke, and moved closer towards the window, and let a light shine into the open bag, turning the contents over with his hand. "Ah," he ejaculated, "by Jove, but you made a grand haul. We'd better go round to the front door and let them know what's been happening." We all marched to the side yard to the front, and the prisoners guarded by each of the two stalwart detectives. "Let's get in the background. We don't want to be recognized," said Graceman to me as the inspector knocked at the main entrance. The servant started back in alarm on beholding a band of men on the porch, but a few words from Layman assured him somewhat, and closing the door, he went to fetch his master. "By Jove, that's old Colonel Stanley," whispered Graceman in an ear. A tall, white-haired man threw the door open widely. "Well, friends, what's the matter?" "Nothing very serious," replied Layman. "Your house has been broken into while you were dining, but we secured the thieves in the act and have all the plunder here," tapping the bag. "Good gracious! Are you a police officer?" said the colonel. Layman nodded, and the colonel asked him to go in. "We may as well toddle," remarked Graceman, taking my arm. "Tell the inspector, Tom, and Mr. Halton that I had gone back to the Magpie." It was not long before the inspector joined us, and when I suggested whiskey this time, he did. He still retained the black bag. "I've sent the men up to the railway station," he said, in answer to Graceman's inquiry, "and if you don't object, we might catch the next train back to town, as I shall feel more comfortable when these jokers are safe under lock and key." On our journey to Waterloo, Layman related that what had passed when he entered the house of the colonel's invitation. The old man called his son out from the dining room, and Layman related the affair of the capture, and it was agreed that nothing should be said to the guests till after dinner was finished. Then the story was to be told, and all the people in the house were to make a list out of what story was to be told, and things they had missed. The list was to be sent to the inspector at Scotland Yard. Layman also was to catalogue the contents of the black bag and send the list to the colonel, who was to attend the police court in the following morning, when no doubt the magistrate would order the things to be handed over to him. When the inspector had finished relating the arrangements, he turned to Graceman and begged him to relate how he discovered the plans of the burglars, which he had forecasted so exactly. Graceman unbuttoned his overcoat, and taking his pocketbook, handed Layman a little slip with a newspaper cutting. "Have you seen that before?" he asked. "No," the inspector replied in a hesitating manner. Then suddenly, as a remembrance seemed to strike him, "Yes, I have, though, by Jove. Didn't it appear in the morning papers a few days ago?" "Quite so, in the Daily Post agony column," replied Graceman. "But what's that got to do with the affair?" "That's my information received, that's all," said Graceman quietly. "Do you mean that this is all you had to work on?" quickly demanded Layman. "Yes." "Well, but I won't swear. Please explain and settle me." "Don't worry, there's a good fellow," replied Graceman as he handed me the cutting, which was as follows. Jim. Then he continued, "This appeared in the Daily Post Agony column last Monday, and I read it and solved it was returning to Sonning. Then I wired you to come to see me. Similar notices had appeared in the same paper at different times during the past 2 or 3 months, but you put the clue in the hands at Maidenhead."
Me? How so?
"When you were informed me that similar burglaries had occurred at Woking, Sevenoaks, and other places. Now all these little cryptograms have an attraction for me, and I've taken the trouble to decipher them. The answer to this one is found by..." He handed us, and so saying, he handed us a slip of paper on which was penciled the following: 013, W26, S1, N14, E27, U2, H15, D28, N3, A16, N29, B4, L17, E30, U5, F18, S31, R6, P19, D12, Y7, A20, A20, A33, S8, S21, Y34, T9, T22, N35, A10, S23, E36, T11, I24, X37, I12, X25, T38. Jim. "If you start at the number 1 and read the figures in numerical order in the translation, it comes out Sunbury Station, 6:30 Wednesday next. Jim. Those that appeared in the previous week solved themselves by the same rule, but each read differently, the difference being in the place and time of the meeting. I looked up the file of the papers and found out that each date of the burglary took place in the neighborhood given, but in 2 cases the name appended to the cryptogram was Bloater. The others were all Jim. I concluded that it was a practice of these rascals that when they spotted a suitable crib to crack, they communicate the facts to each other by this means. I think you'll admit my conclusions are justified themselves, and by our joint efforts we have outwitted the enemy."
"Joint efforts is good, remarkably good," Layman said, with a half-hearted kind of laugh. "A pretty tale to pitch to my chief. How did you manage it, Layman? He will say. Joint efforts by the man unknown, I answer. Make him smile, won't it?"
"Pooh! You can put your chief right better than that," replied Graceman. "Say anything or nothing, but mum's the word in regards to Mr. Halton and myself. And now, good night to you."
And shaking hands with Layman as the train drew into Waterloo, we left him to look after the safe custody of his charges. It may well be in conclusion to relate that at the trial it was proved fully that the prisoners had concerned all of the burglaries mentioned in this narrative, and the sentence was 10 years penal servitude, the judge commencing Inspector Layman for the smart way in which he handled discovering the captives.